Hey, welcome to The Feast Life, where we empower you, the modern homeschool mom, to create a life and homeschool you love. I'm Julie Ross, the creator of the award-winning curriculum A Gentle Feast, a homeschool veteran of over 20 years, and a certified Christian life coach. Charlotte Mason said, life should be all living, not a mere tedious passing of time. So on this show, we seek to savor the feast of life. So go get your favorite beverage and pull up a chair. You're welcome at this table. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Feast Life. I'm your host, Julie Ross, and I'm here today with Beth Howard. Hey, Beth.
Hi.
I'm so glad you're on today because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about shaping a mother's heart and their Charlotte Mason education of their children and how valuable it is to also give that education to themselves. So thank you for coming on. Before we dive into our conversation, I would love it if you could just let people know a little bit about you and your family and like your homeschool journey up till now.
Yeah, so I am Beth Howard. My name on social media and stuff is Bethany Ann, but I do go by Beth. And I live in Colorado with my husband and my two kids, and we have a lab mix that we love, and he's wonderful. We really enjoy hiking and being outside as much as possible. So Colorado is the perfect place for us. My daughter is going into fifth grade, and my son is going into kindergarten. Yeah. And then we're pre-pandemic homeschoolers, but I am a reformed taught schooler. When my daughter was,
Hot schooler. That is I learn something new every day on these shows.
yes. So all of those wonderful, beautiful, sweet little learning stations that are set up for babies in diapers, I did that. We laminated so many things for my 20-month-old. Her first day of school picture, she is holding a balloon and she is wearing a diaper.
Oh my
Um,
God, that is so precious.
it is, I was still counting her age in months, but we were homeschooling. And I recently shared it's for one, we could not afford preschool. It was just on a single income, preschool was so out of the realm of
Oh,
possibility for us. I'm a former teacher, so I figured I can get her ready for kindergarten. Like, we can do this. So I decided we were going to homeschool preschool. I was bored out of my mind with one child
yeah.
at home, and we needed some structure. So I started doing all of these little learning activities, and that kind of progressed through the preschool years until about the time we got ready for kindergarten, and I was handed the book For the Children's Sake.
Oh dear, no.
And it's the gateway to
Let me
Charlotte
rock
Mason.
your world, right?
And I read it and I knew this is the type of education that I wanted. I wish that I had. I wanted my daughter to have. We were in the middle of an adoption process. So it gave me something new to consider. And we started implementing the Charlotte Mason principles basically from kindergarten, except I was still so enthusiastic that we started Ambleside year one with my kindergarten. So yeah, my
She's
son has
she was prepared. See, so
I
it's
was so prepared.
good.
My son has had a very different preschool and he'll have a very different kindergarten experience than
Yeah.
she did, but it's still wonderful. And then the pandemic came and everything shut down and we were already homeschooling. And then the next year we were like, we're doing good. Let's keep doing it. And now we're going into fifth grade and we love Charlotte Mason homeschool and we love what we're doing and we're just gonna keep doing it.
Yeah. So do you mind if I ask you some questions? I'm just fascinated with this whole thing. Like comparing kind of your daughter's kind of preschool years to what your son has been experiencing. What is the biggest difference you have seen?
So not so much child led. My son has not really had he's had the quiet growing time that when I look back on, I don't regret the more academic preschool years that my daughter had because that was really good for her.
Yeah.
He still has to conform to the fact that he has a big sister who is compulsory schooling and she needs to do a narration.
Right.
Um, he is a very Charlotte Mason now kindergartner because he will interject his narrations. So we will be reading my daughter and I will be reading a book and he goes, you missed something. And when I look at like the list of attainments for
Yeah.
the child, he can name off birds, he's got flowers,
Yeah.
we've spent a lot of time really like growing him in these years in more of a quiet and gentle way. And it's been so sweet to see. My daughter was chapter book reading by
Yeah.
age 5. And part of that is her personhood, and part of that is because we've started learning letters at 2.
Yeah. Right.
So,
I think it's important because there is so much pressure to do that. But like you're saying, like you don't regret that time. You don't regret
no.
in that approach
Yeah.
that really worked for her and her personality too. So again, it's finding what works for each kid and embracing them as persons too, which is really important. Okay, so let's dive into kind of what the topic we're going to be talking about today. So
Yeah.
how did you start reflecting on your own education? Is that how you got started into this kind of concept
Yeah.
of culture?
Yes. When I read For the Children's Sake, I remember thinking, I wish this is the type of education that I had growing up. And I my parents did not homeschool me. I went to a variety of different schools. I lived overseas, so I went to the military schools. I've done public school, I've done private school, I went to a public liberal arts university. So there was this aspect of I want to redeem my education, but I've always felt well educated. My
Yeah.
parents encouraged me to read a lot and widely. My dad is a history buff. He has taken me to every battlefield that, like, within a driving distance of where we ever lived.
Sounds like my dad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was 3 years old and he took us to Troy and he would say, because I
Awesome.
lived in Turkey,
Wow.
he would say, "You're going to care that you were here one day."
Yeah.
And when you're 3 and 5
Wow.
and 10, you don't care. And then I stood my 3-year-old in front of the Declaration of Independence in DC. And I was like, no, this is important. You're going to care. So there was that natural progression. And then seeing this wonderful education that I was working towards with my daughter and realizing that I didn't actually trust the process. I know a lot of Charlotte Mason moms will say, trust the process. And an element of that is true. But for me, I needed to see the process in myself to
Wow.
start trusting it for my daughter. I started keeping a narration notebook and I started nature journaling and I started a book of centuries and I started all of these aspects of a Charlotte Mason education and reading multiple books at one time and commonplacing and doing what I was expecting her to do for my own self.
Mm.
And once I started seeing that play out in my own life and actually seeing it was a rich and wide feast for myself. And these are all actual legitimate ways to further your education or to achieve an education. It helped me trust Charlotte Mason's process with my daughter better.
Wow, that is so neat. I think that's so good. That's a good point because sometimes it can be like, yeah, just drink the Kool-Aid. It's all
Yeah,
gonna be fine. And you're like, wait, what? No, this makes no sense. And it's so different than most of us were educated. So
no.
it's really gonna, I don't know if it's really gonna work.
Well,
And
and
so being able to see the fruit for yourself, and I definitely see that. I don't think I intentionally did that, but after
mhm,
like several years of doing all those things, the nature journaling and the narration things with my children, I was like,
yeah,
I'm a different person now.
exactly.
I start to see the world differently. I'm starting to think differently. And I'm like, if this is changing me at my age when I'm, old and set in my ways, how much more will this change them as they're growing as
Yeah. And we talk so much about how education's a life, but a lot of moms are not giving themselves that same life. And I think it's vitally important if we are expecting our children to do this process, there should be a level of expectation that we are holding ourselves to, that we can also narrate something back. Narration is really hard. I grew a lot in empathy. Once I had to start narrating things, I'm like, oh, this is actually real tough to do.
Yes, that is so true. I don't know where she says it, but Charlotte Mason says, if you want to see what narrations, read Austen's or Dickens before you go to bed. And then the next
Yeah.
day, tell someone about it. And I always say, or read Charlotte Mason's volumes and then go and tell someone about
Yeah.
it. You realize this is actually really challenging and it's such higher level critical thinking skills and just like recall. But unless you put yourself in the student's shoes, oh, this is easy. You should be able to do this. Why can't you do
Just
this?
tell me what you read. What did you
Yeah.
hear?
Like, were
And
you
then
not listening to me? You should
I
be able to
know.
tell me all about this.
And it struck me when my daughter at one time she asked me after church, so what'd you hear in that sermon? And I was like, oh,
Ooh, called out, right?
okay. Um, because we all do it with reading. I do it when I like have the book open in front of me and I'm reading to my own self. And I realize I'm like, I have read 3 pages and
I have
nothing.
no
There's
idea what's
nothing
happening.
there. So it definitely helps me with my daughter when I realize I've now read you 2 or 3 pages. And we last year was a big year with turning over a majority of the books to her. I now, I can't remember which volume she says it, but Charlotte Mason does talk about how reading aloud is like a treat for children after a certain age. And
Yes.
it's like the bedtime stories or the afternoon activity, like the school book should be read for themselves. And we're at that point now where the school books are being read for herself, which means I have to pre-read everything because she could just make up a narration and I don't know. Yeah.
So do you consider that part of, okay, first of all, so we use the term mother culture. Can you break
Yes.
that down? Because that's something that if you're not new to Charlotte Mason, nobody knows what that means or has ever heard that word before.
No, you're right. So mother culture comes from a PNAU article, and the only name we have or the letter we have associated with it is a woman called A. And
It's so ambiguous and mysterious. It's
I
like,
know, and I wish we had known who this woman was because I feel like she probably was a mom.
mhm,
And we often confuse or kind of relate mother culture to self-care. So we would say self-care has become the thing that's spread with modern moms now. And it's anything from go get your nails done, make sure you have the workout. And sometimes even like basic hygiene tasks are said as like, you can take a long shower, take a bath, and put a bath bomb in there. And that's self-care. It's still nice, but
very nice.
mother culture is it's more of pursuing things that grow you as a person and not necessarily taking care of yourself. And growing yourself as a person, you're taking care of yourself. So mother culture would include things like reading widely, reading multiple books, or reading one really good book. Charlotte Mason talks about if the mother could learn to do for herself what she does for her children. And then she says, let the mother go out to play. But she references go into a field for half a day and be with nature and observe it, or go to an art gallery for a day and wander around these beautiful paintings that you've been teaching your children. So it's a way of nourishing yourself in an educational
Yeah.
setting,
Yes.
and that's going to provide encouragement and fulfillment outside of more of a fleeting aspect. So I tend to view mother culture as not necessarily self-care aspects that like one and done where you take a bath and you might de-stress a little bit, but more as like an active pursuit of growing as a person.
Yes.
That way I am more fulfilled like just in my own self,
Yeah.
and I'm then able to serve the people around me better.
Yeah. And Charlotte Mason talks about how our minds are only really fed upon ideas. But
Exactly.
somehow think that ends like when you're 18 or something. And it's like
Yeah.
you're starving your own mind by not feeding it these proper things. We all
Yeah.
still eat that proper diet our whole lives.
I think it's one of the wonderful aspects of a Charlotte Mason education is you have these moms who weren't nourished on these ideas as children growing up. We're now hitting the point where we're seeing a lot more like second generation
Yeah.
homeschoolers and or like outspoken second generation homeschoolers and some second generation Charlotte Mason homeschoolers, which is really cool. There's a couple I've run across and they've had these nourishing ideas as children, but a lot of us haven't. And we tend to look at our children's education and take ownership of it. And that's not necessarily bad, but I think as moms, we also need to be actively pursuing outside of our children's education because we are people and we have different ideas. We get to chase these own rabbit trails for ourselves instead of relying on our kids of
Yes.
you
And
should
the
really
source
love
of
this.
our ideas can't come from
Yeah,
bird book, which is great, but we have to have our own nourishment that's for an adult.
exactly. And my daughter and I disagree often on what is a living book. Books that I have found exceptionally living in our homeschool, they've been fine. They're wonderfully well written, but they weren't living for her. And then books that she's found living, I'm just like, oh, this one again. So,
That's funny. So, okay, so how can mothers take Charlotte Mason's approach and philosophy and apply it to their own learning then?
yeah. So, one of the areas that I've done this in is I have taken basically all of the subjects that are required in a Charlotte Mason education, nature lore, literature, poetry, and I have picked books for my own self to read within that capacity. So, I will read a classic novel, I will read a more modern literature book, I read nature lore, history, science, all of that per term. So, I have a term book list, and then each week I go off of, I don't do written narration every day. I do require my daughter to, but I don't, if I can get to it twice a week, it is a good week.
Yeah.
And this is outside of the spiritual faith formation aspect. So I know a lot of morning times for moms is Bible reading, devotional reading, and that's what we have time for in certain seasons of our life. And that is good and rich and wonderful. But we know that there's no separation between the secular and the sacred. So these living ideas are present throughout all of these books that we can read.
Right.
And then as I read these books, whatever I'm reading in the term, I will take aspects of those books and put them in my commonplace journal and I'll nature journal. We do nature walks with our kids. So when I see something in nature that I'm interested, not even my kids are interested in, I'm just interested, I will journal that. So I'm not necessarily relying on them to guide me
Yeah.
in this pursuit. And then the same with my book of centuries, based off of what I'm reading or what I've learned or what I heard on a podcast, I get to record it in my book of centuries, and it's my own living idea. I'm not taking my daughter learned about Henry VIII, and now I have to also
Yours,
do
right.
Henry VIII. Like I,
Yeah. One of the terms you mentioned that I think might be good to clarify for people who are new to all of this is that you said commonplace book. Can you describe that for people?
yeah, so the commonplace book is when you are reading those captain ideas or those living ideas that you see within the book. I should have brought them downstairs. I have they're called book darts, and they're these little metal darts that you can, tabs that you can stick in the book and highlight without highlighting or writing in your book. And then I just go back. I actually do all of my commonplace journaling at the end of a book. And then I will write down whatever quote that is still resonating with me and I've gone back and I've thought upon and I just want to have permanently recorded in a journal.
Yeah. Do people, I'm just popping out of my head here, use like digital things for that too? Because I am always like putting quotes on like Goodreads or things like that aren't
Yeah.
not handwriting them.
Yeah, you
Go
can
back
definitely.
and I can search tags and I'm techie, but
Yeah, or even people make beautiful like Canva illustrations based off of quotes that they've seen in books or quotes of a poem that they've seen and really loved. So it's just a way you could do it digitally or write it by hand of
no handwriting is supposed to be beneficial. But for my social media, whatever, I need to be able to search and what was that quote in that one book that about the
my
thing,
gosh. And I keep my journal organized by books because I know I can recall. I'm like, I remember with Charlotte Mason volumes, I actually highlight in different colors because I'm like, I remember
Yeah.
like which volume and I remember what color. So let me just flip through all of these colors.
So you do, is your highlights by topic?
Yeah.
Oh, I
Anything
like that.
about nature, I highlight in green because of course I highlight it in green and then I have, yeah, different colors for different things. And then they all get muddled. I'm at the point now, I
Yeah.
almost need a new set of Charlotte Mason volumes because eventually you just, after going through them a few times, you've highlighted
The
everything. And
whole
then,
entire book. One of mine, volume 6, you just open it and the pages just
oh my gosh,
no longer bound anymore. It's so
I
sad, but
know.
I'm like you, I can remember, I can see the quote in my mind. And so I don't want to do a new volume because I'm like, oh, I'm like that with my Bible I've had since I was 14. I'm like, I
Yeah.
can see it in my head. I know where it is, but literally I'm missing half of Genesis now. It's fallen off. Anyway, rabbit trail. So I love this concept because you're taking these principles and you're applying them into your own life. Like you're saying, it helps you see the benefit so that you can
Hmm.
stay in the philosophy. You can see how it's changing you. But also your kids are seeing you do the things that you're asking them to do.
Yes. And I think
Yeah.
that's so important for kids because when you're saying this matters and then you never do it, does it actually
Yeah.
matter? If you tell your kids, it's important, like nature journaling is a wonderful way to connect with nature and it helps you become a scientist and you're making observations and you can narrate and all of these things, but you never nature journal. Like
No.
there's a disconnect between what is valuable and important and what isn't. And we, you see it all the time where people will say, you want your kid to read more, but they
Mhm.
never see their parents reading.
Right.
Or you want your kids off technology more, but you're always on your phone.
Yep.
Like, so you have to model it, especially I feel like with my daughter is entering the tween years and modeling for her is so important where I know she's making observations when I don't even realize she's making observations and these are impactful and important. And it's not to say I always need to be at the top of my game and perfect and everything, but just for her to see every once in a while, oh, you're reading that interesting book. What's that? She likes to ask me what books I'm reading or something interesting that I've read. And she's starting to recommend books because she's picking things up herself. So she'll just come and hand me a book and go, I think you'll really like this.
Oh, I love that. And
So
have those shared conversations around learning.
yeah.
It's not like this formal thing that we have to do. It's just, oh, what are you reading? Okay, let me tell you
Yeah.
about it. Like it becomes a natural part of your life instead
Mhm.
of like, this is school.
Yeah.
What other benefits do you think there are other than it helps you have more faith in the philosophy and then it models it for your children? What other benefits are there to embracing some of this learning for yourself?
So I believe, at least in my own life, that this is the active pursuit of beauty and goodness, especially in times where there has not been beauty and goodness. So I really started enacting. this sort of philosophy for myself. It was about 2.5 years ago. I was diagnosed with a chronic pain disease. So I have multiple autoimmune conditions, and I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia after years of symptoms and testing. And I had one of my autoimmune diseases came out of remission, and it sparked a massive chronic pain flare that lasted for months. Um, it was bad to the point where I was basically debilitated to the couch. And my default was scroll my phone because I'm on the couch. I can't do much. We would do school, and I would use up all of my energy on doing school and then huddled up under a blanket just in
Yeah.
pain for months. And then I started gathering books about me, like my own books, because I needed something else that took my mind off of being in pain.
Yeah.
So I pulled a book here and a book there and started reading a little bit more widely for my own self. And then I brought over my nature journal and started tracking the weather and making like a little weather chart for the month. And a lot of my pain was triggered by cold. So I was like just trying to get out of being cold. Colorado in February, it could be 60 degrees or it could be negative 10 degrees. So we just have this wide array of temperature changes. And at this point, we were starting to wonder, did we need to make major family decisions to move? What do we need to do? And the whole time I focused outside of schooling and just keeping kids alive on pursuing goodness and beauty. And a turning point for me was I was in an MRI machine and they didn't give me headphones and there's nothing to listen to. And there was a lot of scary diagnoses my doctors were talking about. So they did a brain and spinal MRI. And I remember I think it's in home education where Charlotte Mason talks about your children should have a gallery of pictures in their mind that they can return to. And I laid in the MRI machine and I closed my eyes and I did a picture study. And I went through all of these pictures that we had learned about over the last, at this point, 3 years of Charlotte Mason homeschooling.
Yeah.
And that was a real turning point for me of, oh, I did a thing. I returned to the gallery in my mind. What can I do next? And it was like, I can have my own poetry recitation. I can return to these beautiful pieces when my life feels really difficult right now.
Wow, that is such a beautiful story. Thank you so much for being vulnerable
Yeah.
and sharing that. I'm sure that was such a hard and scary time. And I've totally had that in my own life too, of just really hard times and how much the Charlotte Mason education that I'm giving my children has sustained not
Yeah.
only my children, but also me. It would be like, oh, we're reading Heidi, and I'm seeing how this little girl is like facing diversity. And I'm like, I can do this hard thing in my life. Or we're
Yeah.
like the armor of God just happens to be our memory verse for this month. It's like
Yeah.
it all fits together.
And I think as moms, we want to believe that our children are going to have this wonderful and blessed life, and that's not a guarantee. They are very likely going to face some level of adversity, and giving them beauty, integrating them with beauty from an early age is so important for them and their mental health as they get older. Because if I can return to nature and go for a walk, and that is going to fill me up, I can take joy in a sunset, or you don't even have to paint the sunset. You can just go out and hear a bird song and realize this is a beautiful and wonderful thing. I think as moms, we forget that we are also dealing with hard things. We know that we're dealing with hard things, but we forget how simple something like hearing a bird can mean to us. And knowing what that bird is also really good.
Yeah, I totally embarrassed myself. I was in Europe last week and I'm like, there's so many owls out here in the middle of the day. Do you all hear them? And like someone in our group is like, that's a grouse. And I'm like, okay, never heard of that bird because we don't have those. But it really sounds like an owl. It's like, whoop, 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 whoop. And I'm
Yep.
like, so I had to go home and like research all, find out what it was and stuff like that. Totally embarrassed myself. But it was like, what happened for me is I noticed the trees, like just being over
Yeah.
here, the trees and the flowers and things that we don't have here. And the bird, like, I'm like, this is all a whole new thing. This is amazing. But I think sometimes as moms, we could think, okay, I feel burnout. I feel stressed. I know that I should be looking at beauty and filling myself up with these beautiful things, but I don't have time and I'm already so tired and worn
Yeah.
out. So then we just don't do it. And then we get more and more burnt out and we wonder why. So
Yeah.
what advice you have for moms who are like, the wall, like where you were at that point of how do I even get the energy to do this other thing?
I would say if you have children that are already in homeschool, just delight in what they're doing. And so instead of focusing on how well is their narration, how become an active participant in their school. So contribute, let them narrate first. They should be the ones narrating first. And then contribute part of your narration to it and say, oh, I also noticed that, this. And when you're on a nature walk, let your children explain things to you, not for the sake of seeing if they're right. Because we all have that habit, I feel like, in us of, hey, what flower is that? And it cracks me up when people say, oh, I hate it when people quiz my kids. I'm like, I quiz my kids all the time. Be like, just what bird that is. But just doing it with your children. So when you're asking them to do a nature journal, do a nature journal entry. When you're asking them to, if they're old enough to do a commonplace entry, do a commonplace entry, or call your friend and say, hey, this is the book I'm reading. Do you want to talk about it? Or can I tell you about it? Or your husband. Tell your husband all about those books.
Or start a podcast.
Or start a podcast. Exactly. And then so many people can talk to you about books.
Tell your ideas too. Never wants to listen. No, I love that. I love that because yes, because I was going to ask you that. Do you do your book of centuries when your child is doing your book of centuries, or do you have a separate time that you're doing your kind of mother culture things?
Sometimes I do it with her because we need that little extra. So we are actually just starting the book of centuries this year with her because they'll be going into year 5, and she's getting it as her first day of school gift. She knows it's coming because she's been asking for a year. She's, do I get it next year? She has a timeline journal right now
because she sees you doing it.
Yes, she sees mine.
Otherwise, how would she even know what that is? You know what? We haven't even defined that. Can you explain what a book of?
Oh yes, the book of centuries. The book of centuries is, so it's basically a notebook or a 2-page journal, and on one side it'll have 100 years per page. A lot of them start way back, either prehistory or ancient times, and it moves all the way through modern times. So you will have the years 1900 to 19099. And you record according to you important living ideas that have happened within that century. You can add notes, you can draw, you can watercolor. People who are not artistic and they don't want to do that, they can put stickers. I think a lot of times we get held up on the legalistic aspect of it has to be sketched and watercolored, and it doesn't have to be. You can put stickers.
I print my stuff off the internet. I'm a scrapbook. I got so much scrapbook
Glue it in.
stuff left over. It's like a whole big artsy fartsy mess. I put paint splatters. Mine is total artsy fartsy book of centuries.
What the point of it is to help you see the relationship of global history over time. The book of centuries was mind-blowing to me because when I took AP US history and AP European history in high school, we learned the same time frame in 2 separate years, but we only focused on US history, on what was happening in the United States. I never made the connection between, oh, this is happening in the United States, Queen Victoria is over here, and this is happening in Russia, and look at what's going on in Africa. And none of that clicked for me until I started a book of centuries. And I'm like, oh my, if I had this in high school, it would have made so much sense. Yeah. And I realized I was processing history on a singular timeline according to which place I was reading about. So it was just all compartmentalized and separated. No, history, it doesn't happen in a bubble. It's what this person decides impacts it. And we know that to be true. But when you see it on paper and you're like, oh, actually, this is all of the things that's going on at the same time globally. Yeah,
it's really cool.
So, I have heard from parents who have Charlotte Mason educated kids who are now in college have called their parents and said, can you send me my book of centuries?
That's awesome.
Take it to college because they're going to need it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it helps you. It really does help you put all the big picture together. And especially I'm a very visual person. So seeing things and going, okay, this was happening here. And then I can flip back. Oh, this is we're talking about seeing the quotes in the book. It's the same thing with the book.
Exactly.
So that's really great though, because you were starting something. So Charlotte Mason doesn't recommend starting that until 5th grade when they're doing multiple streams of history, but because you were modeling that for your child, it was something that she looked forward to. So that's awesome. So a great place for parents to start then, from what I hear you saying, is when your child is already doing something in your school, instead of just sitting there or going on your phone or doing the laundry or whatever, actually sit and do the thing with them.
Right? And kids find, so at least for my kid, and what I noticed from being a classroom teacher previously, Kids really love learning in community. So I have a unique, it's not so unique, but in the homeschool world, it feels unique. I have one compulsory learner. So my son has been sweet little wild and free toddler. He's no longer the happy tag along. He wants to be involved, but he's here for stories and snacks.
Yes.
But my daughter, you have to do math today. And it can feel pretty isolating for a kid when there isn't another learner around. But if the mom steps up, and this is where you now get to be like, instead of the teacher part, the mother part, and do it with them. And you're not doing it to critique them, and you're not doing it to show them, like, this is actually how you do a nature journal. Because she might be nature journaling a beaver we saw, and I'm nature journaling this flower. You get
Yes,
to have
my kids, most of the time, theirs looks way better than mine.
Oh, yeah, she's
I'm
far
like, okay, my watercolors and yours, yeah.
Yeah, my daughter is so meticulous. Like, we need to get better about doing the art lessons because the art lessons are what supports the nature journaling. But she wants to watch the YouTube video on, like, how do you draw a chipmunk today?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so now we're going to do an art lesson that segues into nature journaling.
Yeah, that's great. But it seems so, when you put it like that, it doesn't seem so daunting.
No, it isn't. And you're already there at the school table with them. And sometimes this is where it gets hard because a lot of us do have houses to keep up, and we have other children that need our time and attention and care. But if we can jump in for 5 or 10 minutes and show our kids, hey, this also matters. And there are times where I'll do this in the evenings while my husband and I chat. I'll bring out my nature journal and I can talk and do my nature journal, or I'll do it in the morning, or I'll bring I bring my journals with me, not all of them, but the commonplace narration journal and nature journal go on every trip that I go on because I can do a narration journal in the car.
Yeah.
So
It's really cool. Yeah, just to keep it with you. Now let's talk a little bit about the reading. So do you read some of your books while your kids are reading their books once they're independent, or you do that? Okay, so where do you fit all that in?
I try to follow the Charlotte, not to the full extent that she followed. She had a timeline of reading. I can't do that. We do not have governess that's going to take care of my kids for me and clean my house.
Hey, I just wanted to let you know some super exciting news. I am opening the doors to my signature course, The Confident Homeschool Mom, in the middle of September. You can now get on the wait list so that you know exactly what's happening and get all the details. The Confident Homeschool Mom is my 12-week program where I will provide you with teaching and also small group life coaching to help you ditch the overwhelm and the fear and doubt that can often come with homeschooling so that you can show up confident and with clarity and with calm and peace so that you can have a life and homeschool you love. In order to get on the wait list so you know exactly when the doors open, go to thefeastlife.me/confident waitlist. That's all one word. thefeastlife.me/confident waitlist. I hope you will join me this September for this transformational program.
But I try to wake up a couple hours before the kids get up. And I'm in a good season where I'm able to do that. Both my kids sleep through the night. They go to bed relatively early. My daughter's starting to stay up later than I would love, but I hear that's normal for her age. So I try to get up early where I can spend 15 minutes reading this book and reading that book. I also schedule them out by week. So if I have a science
lesson plans at the same time you're planning out their lesson plans for the week.
I do. I now give other moms lesson plans. I've taken all of this and I wrote programs called A Mother's Education. So I'm usually a term ahead of everybody else because I'm pre-reading all the books I want to put in the next Mother's Education. But it usually has
call me and discuss them, or you give them lesson plans and kind of thing.
Yeah.
Is it like do you meet and discuss it like a book club, or is it like, here's the lesson plans that you go do on your own?
It's go do on your own. So here's the scheduled out readings and everything. And then there's a Facebook group and then a Mighty Networks group where people can chat if they wish. But because we're moms and a lot of us are just trying not to be on social media all the time, it's there if you would like it for support, but you don't have to be there.
Are you or have you been in a group, like even in person, like a book club?
Yeah.
reading through
Yeah.
volumes or anything like that?
Yeah, so we have a wonderful Charlotte Mason book club in our community that I've been able to be a part of for the last 5 years. So we're on book number 7 right now. We've read through all the volumes together. We get to chat about it together. And then the mom friends from that book club, we had a co-op for a while. And we also do, I don't, the Charlotte Mason moms listening to this will understand. We do a Marco Polo book club where we have a book that we read through and usually every month, every 6 weeks or so. And we kind of hop in and out as we're able to. I haven't been a part of this last couple books because things just got very busy this summer. But we read the chapters, we discuss it, but we also do our own narrations of the chapters.
Marco Polo is like a voice recording app,
Yeah,
right?
it's a voice and video recording app. So we will like the book right now is Pride and Prejudice. So you get your chapters for the week, and then when you're ready, you hop on and you do your narration, and then we comment back to each other's narrations, discuss the book, and then we progress forward.
I love that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I think having that community too really does help keep you like accountable. So if you're like, I want to start reading some more for myself, start your own book club. I have done that so many times in the different
Nice.
places I've lived, and just like, who wants to do a book club? And then you actually force yourself to read it because you're like, I'm not going to show up at the book club and like be the only one who didn't read it.
And I think in book clubs too, we naturally narrate. We're like, oh, do you remember in this chapter where this happened? Can you believe? And we're giving narrations. So
Yeah. And yeah, in my old community, I was a part of a Charlotte Mason book club for 6 years before we moved. And that was, they're still meeting and they post up on Facebook, and I get so jealous because it is a
yeah.
sweet time. But it really does help if you are reading through your volumes, because sometimes even now I'll read through it and be like, I have no idea what this actually means. Teaching yourself, so which one is it? And having people to talk about it with is so helpful.
We just had that same conversation at our last book club meeting. We're on book number 7, which is dense. She's taking, here's my principles, and this is like what you're actually going to do now. And we have found in all of her volumes, she will say, here's the thing I don't want you to do. But she doesn't tell you that. And you're like, oh yeah, great idea, Charlotte.
Yeah,
That's
right.
like, let me tell you why that's terrible. I'm like, oh no. I thought unit studies were the best, but so
Yeah, having a group of people to talk with is wonderful for
mhm.
sure, but not everybody has that opportunity. So
Yeah.
each week you sit down and you schedule out your readings. Can you give me an example of what a typical week would look like?
Yeah, so I'm usually working through 7 books outside of what my daughter's reading and my own. I've made it a personal goal this year to read one C.S. Lewis book a month. I have fallen behind on that goal. So sure,
Okay.
we're not going to accomplish that because C.S. Lewis is just so dense. You have to savor it.
And I think that's a really good point too. So do you implement like her approach of like short readings,
Yeah.
allowing time for the ideas to grow? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So let's say on Monday, I just read the book, The Disappearing Spoon, and I might schedule, it's a science book. So I might schedule like one chapter on Monday and then maybe another chapter on Tuesday. And that gives me time to think through that book. And then I'm working on the book Where the Water Goes. It's about the Colorado River. And yeah, it's really interesting. And the impact on, like, it's the impact of the Colorado River on how it feeds Las Vegas and it feeds all of these desert towns and desert cities. So I might read like one of those chapters on Tuesday, and then I'll have whatever literature book I'm working through. I tend to read through my literature books a lot faster just because you can get sucked up in a fiction book. It's really hard to slow down a fiction.
That's
Um,
why I only allow myself to read those on vacation,
it's
because
so
I'll be
hard.
like, oh, you all wanted to eat dinner today? What time
Like,
is it? I'm like, oh,
sorry.
it's 7 o'clock. And like, I'm
Yeah.
so bad with fiction.
And then I try to read poetry every day.
Okay.
Because it's just good to immerse yourself in poetry. Whatever poet, like I'll pick one poet per term and I'll
Okay.
just read much like what she said. And I don't try to overanalyze it. I just let the poems be. And those are really wonderful to practice recitations for your own self or to memorize a poem, or just like we memorize scripture. These are also living ideas that are good and nourishing for ourselves.
Yeah.
And then I'm typically reading through a Charlotte Mason volume and then another parenting or school education type book.
Okay. And how much time is this? How much time are we talking about?
Typically less than an hour a day.
What? Okay, so when you read all that, I'm thinking, okay, 4 hours a day.
No,
Okay,
typically
so
less than an hour.
how do you do all that in less than an hour a day?
Because you're only, I'm also a fast reader, but because you're only reading through one chapter can be anywhere from 5 to 20 pages. And if I know that I'm looking at a chapter that's pretty dense this morning, I might just read my poem, whatever scripture plan I have, and then that one chapter. And when it's done, or I set a time limit and say, I have 30 minutes to read this morning. And part of that is accountability of I still have to make breakfast for my people. I still have to get homeschool stuff ready. I have to wake up on time because if I don't wake up on time, I'm not going to have time to move my body and nourish my mind before heading into the homeschool day. So I look at it as a non-negotiable part of who I am, that just like my body needs nourishment, like my brain needs living ideas for nourishment. And if I'm not actively pursuing that, then it can atrophy and you can start to feel overwhelmed and burned out a lot faster.
Oh, for sure, 100%. So you do all of that in one sitting?
Typically, yeah.
Okay. Do you know people, or what are your thoughts on breaking that up? Because I know like with Charlotte Mason, like in her, if you look at like the schedule
She
herself,
has
yeah,
the afternoon. So she does like 20 minutes of reading before or after lunch. And then she does like an
I
hour
read a travel
reading.
journal like at 2,
I
like so
know.
like
And
okay.
an hour reading before dinner, but somebody else is making her dinner. And then she reads oh
The
gosh.
newspaper, yeah.
Yes. And then she always read a Walter Scott novel before bed. And I can fall asleep to a Walter Scott novel. I've read a few.
Maybe that's what she did. Maybe that's why she read it before bed.
She just loved Walter Scott,
Yeah.
loved him. I've read two. And
Yeah, I'm not a big fan either.
yeah, this is an area I do need to grow in my show, but especially before we get to, I think year 7 is the year we read Ivanhoe. So I need to read Ivanhoe again. I know I can. It is not my bedtime book. So I typically do reading in the evening too. So obviously I can't read an hour before dinner because I have to make the dinner. And I'm able to get some reading time in before I fall asleep or before bedtime, but also I have a husband and we would like to spend time together at the end of a long day. And if I'm just head down on my books, then we don't get that time to talk or so. Yeah, there's aspects where it just has to be modified for the person who's doing it.
100%. But I think what you said was really key is like a non-negotiable. This is part of my life. And so I'm going to make it happen. And when we are like, oh, this would be nice, or this, if I have extra time, I will, blah, blah, blah. And you're never gonna have extra time.
Yeah, my dad, when he was, oh gosh, probably 40s, I was in high school, and he goes, I'm gonna run a marathon. I was like, you're not running a marathon. You're gonna talk about running a marathon, but you're not gonna run a marathon. He ran a marathon, and he goes, the reason I ran this marathon is because you called me a talk abouter. You said you'll talk about it, but you're not actually. That was his like motivation for run. He's since went on to run 10 other marathons. So he's run 10 marathons now. And
But don't tell him he can't do something.
Don't tell him, yeah.
Yeah.
And once in a while, I'm like, oh, it would be nice to do that. And I'm like, don't talk about it. Like, just try it, just do it. And if it's one book, if all you're reading is one book or 2 books, you don't have to read 7. You don't have to do the full Charlotte Mason and keep a book a century. You can pick, I'm going to read a nature lore and I'm going to read a literature. And those are the only 2 things I'm doing. And if I see an interesting bug, I'll maybe draw a picture of it and write what I saw. And if that's all you do, that's good. And if you want to grow from that and build upon that, you can, but you don't have to. Nobody's going to force you to do this.
Right.
But it is a good way to, one, enact the Charlotte Mason method and pursue beauty and give yourself this structured time to nourish your own mind and grow in living ideas that only belong to you. Because once we have this like living idea, it now belongs to us. We can take ownership of it and grow upon it.
Yeah. And just from someone who's old, there's going to be a day when your kids aren't in your house anymore.
Yeah.
And who are you going to be?
Yeah.
If you haven't been feeding your mind for 20 years, like, what kind of person are you going to be? So I want to be a magnanimous person, like Charlotte Mason talks about when I'm an empty nester now. not there yet, but close. And it's
Yeah,
like, I want to be this magnanimous person. I want to have lots of things to talk about with lots of different people about lots of different topics. And if I'm never growing my own mind for the 20 years I'm raising children, I won't be that person.
exactly. We read a Teddy Roosevelt biography this last school year, and it was amazing to me that he was considered one of the most interesting. I think he's an
Oh, it's
incredibly
fascinating.
interesting person. They still use the textbook he wrote about the War of 1812 at West Point, which
Mm.
is insane that he one wrote it. He did all of these things, and it's because he was a well-read person. He could go up to anybody and talk to them pretty much about anything because he read widely. And it wasn't his own ideas. He probably just narrated a lot of what he had read or heard or experienced from other people. But if all we have to talk about is ourself, we're going to run out of things to talk about real fast. But if we can pull on this feast of living ideas that we've come across over years and decades of widely reading, like
Mm.
we can approach any person and situation and have a conversation on and not resort to what's your favorite color? Oh, the weather today. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I saw that too, like just the power of living ideas and the connections that
Mhm.
we make. Like when I
Yeah.
was on vacation in Europe, because every new city I went to, I was connecting it to some story I had read in my
Nice.
book years ago that reminded me of this thing that took place during this time. It was like my brain was like,
Yeah.
it's
We
awesome.
are we recently took a trip to New York City and we were going to go across the Brooklyn Bridge, but it was like 98 degrees and not the day to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge. And
Yeah.
I texted my family, I'm like, fair warning, I read this book about the Brooklyn Bridge. I got all the fun facts. So much to talk
Wow.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, they walked elephants across the bridge. Did you know that? My dad's actually, I did. I read that book a few years ago. Okay. But we read, oh, what did we read? The Mixed Up Files of Miss Basley E. Frankweiler before taking the kids to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And even though it's a fictional book, it was still really wonderful for them because one, we had studied all of these artists that we had talked to, or like that we are now seeing. So we went into the Degas exhibit, and my daughter she's a dancer, and seeing all
Awesome.
of these paintings of ballerinas that she had studied, she was just like, oh, it's here. Look at, they're there. But also they wanted to go look for the bed that Claudia and Jamie slept in when they ran away and hid at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Like that's not actually here.
They found one bed and they're like, that's probably it. I was like, you're right. That looks like the description.
That's awesome. That's hilarious. Okay, so if a mom is, I want to start reading more and feeding my own mind, but I have no idea what good books are out there or where to even start finding books for myself and not just my children. What do you tell
So I tell them to look at Charlotte Mason programs and maybe look at the high school years and
them?
what are you going to expect your high schoolers to read? One, I see this a lot with homeschool moms, especially on social media, this push against reading mythology and to some extent
Do
a
a whole
push.
lot of podcasts on that.
Ah, I'll
I
come
do
back.
that too.
I have so much to say about this.
Okay, good.
And
I'll bring it back.
Plutarch. Plutarch is like really concerning to a lot of parents because we don't have experience with Plutarch. I love Plutarch. I love reading Plutarch. I would say take these upper level subjects that you're going to expect your children to read and maybe try that if you want to. So Edith Hamilton Mythology is one of my favorite books. I love it. And it
I'll
gives
put
a
that.
really,
I'm
yeah,
writing down what these books are.
you're fine. It gives a really wonderful example of these myths, but they're not toned down. It's not like the Deolaires Greek myth book on higher level, but you can now have a better understanding of it. Read a Shakespeare play just for the enjoyment of reading a Shakespeare play and don't have someone analyze it or tell you to analyze it. Like just let the language wash over you. And if you understand it, great. If you don't understand it, that's okay. Try another one a different time. So I encourage moms to look at these upper level high school, or if you have littles, like if you are an enthusiastic homeschool mom of a 4-year-old, look at year 2 or year 3 of whatever, pick any curriculum and look at those, or whatever books moms are posting on Instagram for adults and say, okay, let me try that.
Mhm.
I also include book lists in my mother's education programs. And yeah, I think they're really good. I have good feedback on them.
Yes. So you give us the link for that too, right?
Yeah, I'll give you the link.
We're interested in doing that. Okay, perfect. Yeah, and I recommend that as well. Look at, so if you're studying the 1800s, look at
Hmm.
what the high schoolers are reading for the
Yeah.
1800s. One, that's going to help you someday if you stay with this kind of approach, because then you would have already read. And I was trying to think of a book that's included, like Uncle Tom's Cabin or something like that. By the time your kid gets there, you won't have to read it again because you've already read it. So that'll
Yeah.
help you out eventually as well. But then you're able to bring in some of your, obviously, you're not the fountainhead of all knowledge. You don't
No.
need to read these books so that you can teach your children, but it is nice if they're talking about Harriet Tubman and some things that they're reading in their thing, be like, oh, actually, I just read about her, and
Yeah.
you can actually have a conversation.
Yeah. I also, it sounds ridiculous, but those books you hated in high school, try it again.
Yes,
I
yes, absolutely. I love
like
that.
sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I reread The Heart of Darkness. That was one of my first. I'm giving myself a Charlotte Mason education, and I still hated that book. It was still terrible to me. Some people like it. That's
Yeah, I
great.
don't know if I could handle reading Moby Dick again. I think I was so scarred in high school that I still
Yeah.
don't think I would like it, but I agree that sometimes we can surprise ourselves, because I did not like Shakespeare in high school because it was overanalyzed to death, and I hate.
Yes.
And so I think part of it too is this process allows us to redeem our education. Even if you're saying, like, I didn't think I had a bad education either. I felt like I had a very excellent education in school, but now I see this and I was like, oh, it could have been so much deeper.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of it too is because we're not taking autonomy over our education. At least I wasn't in high school. It was pass a test. I have an AP exam. And
Passive.
yeah, and part of it is the stakes are high. If you pass the AP exam, that's college credit. That's a college class you now don't have to pay for if the college accepts it.
Right.
I Yeah, so it's retain the knowledge for as long as you need to in order to pass this test instead of building a wide room. And we only retain, I think it's something like 10% of what we actually read is what sticks with us. And that's those living ideas. Whereas if you have a comprehension test, one, they're not testing for living ideas. They want to know what color shoes Joe was wearing when he walked to the playground. But like we have more autonomy over our education when we're okay with letting go of like supporting details and we're just sticking with the living ideas or the captain ideas.
Yes. And I think it can intimidate some parents to think
Mhm.
about reading for themselves or doing
Yes.
some of these things for themselves, because they have, I don't necessarily want to use the word trauma, but just not great experiences from their own education. And it's like, I don't want to go back there. That didn't
Yeah.
feel good.
And I think too, if we believe that children are born persons, then mothers are born persons. And if our children are worthy of a beautiful and rich education, and we feel like we didn't get that, we are also worthy of a beautiful and rich education because we believe that it is a life. It extends for the duration as long as we are alive. And Charlotte Mason, she self-educated continually for as long as she was alive.
Whole entire life
So
was, yeah.
yeah, if
I'm like,
and
that's why she did all this amazing stuff. That woman read for 5 hours a day.
yeah, she kept reading, she kept putting out PNEU articles, she kept expecting a high caliber of her teachers. So we should not in a way of if you don't do this, you're not doing it well, but in a way of you are a person worthy of a beautiful, rich life that exists outside of homeschooling your children.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, preacher girl, mic drop. Okay, the episode is over, because that's what everybody needs to embrace. We're not adding anything else on your plate. We're
No.
not trying to make your to-do lists longer, your shoulds longer, your must-dos, and put any more burden on you, because you're probably already putting enough burden on yourself. The
Yeah.
key is, do you actually believe you are worthy of growing as a person? And oftentimes the moms I meet, that's the biggest hurdle,
Yeah. And
is
we're so
actually believing you're worthy of that.
Yeah,
Like,
and we're so quick to martyr ourselves and say, I can't, I have to. And some things are legitimate, times of chronic pain or illnesses, or babies are sick, or having tiny babies. But we have audiobooks. We can nourish on audiobooks. And the beauty of a Charlotte Mason education is you can tailor it to yourself. No one's going to say you have to read Moby Dick in order to be a well-educated person. You can pick whatever literature book you want to. If it has a living idea for you, it has a living idea.
yes, and finding the things that, yes, I think that's a great place to start. The things that might interest you or pique your interest, or things you've never thought
Yeah,
about. Not feel like this is the prescribed list of books you must read
exactly.
if you're really a Charlotte Mason educational mom.
Yeah, and I'll go off on rabbit trails where I hyper focus on a book list, and I'm only reading about like books that relate to social media. That's all I'm reading about, and how I went off like
The anxious child. Yeah.
Yeah, read that one, and Glow Kids, and
I do that too. I'll binge like 10 books on one topic. Yeah.
then I'm like, I know everything. We're good. I know 10% of each of these books, which
Yes,
is
right.
100%, and I'm an expert.
Let me tell you what I know.
Exactly. And that's what I come up to my husband. I'm like, I need to tell you about this book. Like, he has asked that I not just like randomly narrate Charlotte Mason not her volumes to him anymore. I need to be in the right frame of mind, and this is not the right. He'll come up from a meeting. I'm like, so Charlotte Mason. He's not.
Yes. Yes. Ask permission. Is it okay if I narrate to you? Is it okay if I tell you about this book?
What's interesting is, so my husband is also public school educated, and his mom was a teacher and all of these things. And he is seeing the benefit of a Charlotte Mason education in our kids and myself. So the other day, he said, tell me about this commonplace journal. I was like, yes, I can do that. And at the beginning of the year, he's, can you make me a book list? Yes, I can make you a book list. So he's starting to see how it's not a homeschool mom or a mom thing. It is just a person thing.
Yes, that's great. Yes. There needs to be mother culture lists for dads too.
I know.
Going to conventions lately, I see more and more dads that are really actually teaching. They're not just, oh, I'm supporting my wife. They're like, no, I teach this subject, or I help with this, or they're like so into it. I'm like, they need a guy book list. Not that there's guy girl books, but you know what I'm saying? There's, you know,
no.
I'm not going to read a book about fishing or something.
I've been asked to put together a father's education so many times. I'm like, I can't. I don't know.
Yeah. Moby Dick. There you go. There's a book about fish.
Yeah. Endurance. We'll read Endurance. We'll read this one. I do say for all homeschooling dads, I'm like, read Winnie the Pooh. Read Winnie the Pooh, either to yourself or your kids, because it is so witty and so funny. If you don't like classic literature, I feel like Winnie the Pooh will make you fall in love with classic children's literature. So
because the Christopher Robin movie as a dad. So sweet. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and hopefully we've inspired a lot of moms to look at their own personal growth and development and say, okay, what can I do to add some of this mother culture into my own life? Keep it simple. What other closing thoughts or words would you say to these moms?
I just want to encourage moms that just like we know that our kids are not guaranteed times of just 100% pure joy, like as moms, we are going to go through multiple facets of struggle. And we focus so much on giving our kids richness and beauty. And it's really important to remember that we deserve this too, outside of the scope of our children. Like we should be building richness and beauty for them. And we're building wide rooms with them, but we need to do it for ourselves, because if the only thing we're focused on is what we're doing for our children and not for ourselves, it's going to feel hard as they get older. Whereas if you're doing it for yourself first, it's like putting on your own oxygen mask on the plane, right? If you're doing it for yourself first, that love and all of that you're learning is going to outpour and flow upon your children as well.
Yeah, it'll give you so much more passion for homeschooling.
It will. Yeah.
Every day won't feel like a drudgery, because it's like,
exactly.
So we get to learn today. This is exciting.
Yeah, and you're gonna trust it so much more. I really believe that. When I talk to younger moms about what can they do when their kids are little, besides reading the volumes, read the volume. If you're able to read the volumes before your children start first grade, try a Charlotte Mason education for yourself and see what it actually does.
Yes, that's such a great point. Okay, so where can moms connect with you and find your resources?
Yes, so I have an Instagram. I am Little World Wanderers on Instagram, and then my website is littleworldwanderers.com.
So where did that name, I've been dying to ask you, this is totally
Yes.
Where did that name come from?
Yeah, it seems obscure. I've asked about rebranding all the time, and I just haven't. Maybe one day I'll rebrand it. I'm just
curious.
Yeah, I used to write these country unit studies, which is they're not Charlotte Mason, but when my daughter was 5, she has a deep love of people. And she says a lot of times she wants to learn how to speak multiple languages. We're working on Spanish. She would like to add in French and Arabic, because she wants to be able to talk to whoever she comes across, whoever she meets, she wants to be able to talk to. So when she was in kindergarten, we were reading a lot of multicultural and diverse books. And then we would read a book about Mexico, and then I would look up a recipe and we would make that together. And then we would do a craft together. And I started building these like little unit studies. And in 2019, I offered them to the homeschool community for free. So
Very generous.
I named it Little World Wanders because we were wandering all over the world in our books. And I would love to like actually wander with the kids. I grew up in different countries and we would love to travel. But my focus over the last couple of years has shifted more towards mother's education and encouraging homeschool moms and things like that.
Yeah, I think it still fits because I feel like with this aspect of mother culture, right? Like we are still wandering the world, but it's the world.
Yes.
It's not necessarily
Yeah.
the physical world. But for me, a Charlotte-Mason education has opened my desire to travel. I have had major wanderlust. So literally last week or 2 days ago, I was in Europe for the first time in my entire life. And it was like such a bucket list thing because I would read about all these countries and all the stuff we were learning about. And I'm like, and now like just being there, like, now I want to go here and here and talk to these people. And like, say, like, I learned more languages so I can talk to more people. And like, it again, it's that big room. And I feel like I thought it was big, but now it's like, how big can it
get? Yeah, just stone by stone. We keep building wider rooms.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode of The Feast Life. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Beth from Little World Wanderers. Let me just recap some of the key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, mother culture matters. Embracing a Charlotte-Mason education for yourself as a mother enriches your life and enhances your ability to homeschool your children effectively. You need to integrate this into your daily life. Incorporate learning activities such as narration, nature journaling, and reading into your daily routine, doing it alongside your children to model lifelong learning. Number 3, pursue personal growth. Dedicate time each day to read a variety of books and engage with living ideas. This not only nourishes your mind, but it also sets a positive example for your children. Build your own book of centuries. Creating a book of centuries helps you see the interconnectedness of global history, making your learning journey more cohesive and comprehensive. And last but not least, believe in your worth. Recognize that you as a mother deserve a rich and fulfilling education. Your personal growth and well-being are crucial for a thriving homeschool environment. Thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this episode, please heart it down below and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and let me know what you learned in today's episode. I'd love to hear from you.